And as you know, I'm recording the lecture. When I'm able to, I will post it or make it available. So if you want to go back and review the lecture, you may do so. All right. All right. So let's start with this. All right. So we're into aircraft wood structures. Throughout the term so far, I have mentioned wood structured aircraft. And pretty much wood is a fabulous material to make an aircraft out of. The problem is that it's a very, very labor intensive process, which drives up the cost. Also, wood gets to be rather expensive. If we kind of think about it, there is criteria for the wood, meaning that the grain has to be a certain, dimension and such, or oh, I'll say it right now. In that grain, the grain of the wood are, of course, those growth rings. Okay. And we want them to be very parallel to each other. Okay. Now, I didn't do it purposefully, but it worked out perfectly. Notice that these two grain lines kind of deviate. The rule is the grain can't deviate more than 1 inch in a length of 15. So if this tree, now figure the tree has to grow, and as it's growing, the climate changes every year. You get winter, you get spring and such, and this all affects the growth rings. Okay. Also, there can be windstorms and that tree is bending, and sometimes there's drought, excess rain. All these things can affect how the grain is developed. Well, if we were to wait for this tree, let's say 20 years for this tree to grow, now we cut it down and now we have to mill that into the proper type of wood. Well, one is that, there's different ways that lumber is cut into boards, so I'm going to kind of draw it down here. If you think about a tree, and then there are these growth rings. Okay. Well, when we cut a board and we look at the side of it, we want to see the grain relatively parallel. Well, the only way we can get that is if the board is what's called quarter sawn. Okay. Now, most or the cheaper way to cut the board is to cut it just straight like so. Well, if you take a look at that, you can see that we wouldn't get grain looking like this. Okay. Like on the end of the board of a properly or a quarter sawn board, the grain would be going like that if you looked at the end of the board. So figure if you look at the end of that, those are all the grain lines. If you cut a board like that, the end of the board is going to have rings like that. So if you go to Home Depot, Lowe's, pick up a 2x4, majority of the time, you're going to find the majority of the wood looking like this. You may get lucky and find a board like this. Okay. Now, so how do they get this is by what's called quarter sawn. So if they cut the board here, okay, you can see that the grain is going in the proper direction. Okay. And then they can do another piece, like a smaller piece here. Then what they do is they cut it this way. And so now these boards have the grain going in the proper direction. So that's a lot more expensive to quarter saw a board than it is to what's called plane saw the board. Okay. Now, once the board is then cut, well, then an inspector has to check the grain. And one of the things that we're looking for is that the grain doesn't deviate more than 1 inch in any 15-inch length. So if we go, let's say from here to here is 15 inches. Okay. If we measure from this point to this point, right, and then measure up, that grain can't deviate, be greater than 1 inch. Let's say it's not. Well, now we come over here. Well, here's where that grain is, right? And this is where this grain is. If we kind of bring that over, we can see at that high point, let's say that is within 15, like 15 inches is way over here now. Okay. And that's greater than 1 inch. This board or that section is rejected. Okay. So, you know, the tree, it could look beautiful when it's growing and stuff, but we really don't know what's inside of it until we fall the tree, meaning cut it down. And that, and even in the process of cutting down the tree has to be very careful because, you know, most lumber, they go in there and they just hack the trees down, they fall on the ground and they could hit, say, a big stone or a rock. This can actually cause a compression failure where then the grain is buckled and split. And that type of wood is unacceptable in the use in aircraft. So they have to be much more careful in when they fell a tree or cut down a tree. Because if it does hit or even falls against another log, you know, they really have to be careful in all those aspects. All right. That's my little, but wood is a fabulous material because it's lightweight, it's strong, and it's flexible. You know, it can, you know, think of a tree growing in the woods. You know, windstorms come by, it sways and bends in the wind without breaking majority of the time, let's say. So it has all the good characteristics that we like. The only thing is to try to mass produce wooden aircraft. You know, aluminum is still king as far as that goes. Composites are getting there. All right. Anyways, I'll continue on. Next, they talk about quality of materials. Now, a lot of times people go, oh yeah, this is where we use Sitka spruce. Okay. There's a lot of different species of wood. Okay. And so there's species of woods and types of wood. And we need to remember not to confuse the difference between species and types. Okay, I'm just going to erase what I've drawn so far. Okay, so species of wood. Generally, we use, or the reference wood, the FAA reference wood is what's known as Sitka spruce. Okay, you figure when wood aircraft were being built, there's a whole wide range of different species. And how do we compare one species of wood to another? And so the FAA, what they did was they just chose a certain species, which happened to be Sitka spruce. And they said, okay, this is going to be the reference wood. And what we're going to do is we're going to list all these other species and compare it to the Sitka spruce. Picture's a little hard to see, but I'll try to blow it up. Okay. So like here's Sitka spruce, because it's the reference wood, as it says here, properties compared to spruce. Well, spruce is 100% of spruce. This is where the grain deviation can't be more than 1 in 15, and you can see that they're all 1 in 15. Okay. Now, the important part about this picture here is it does come from the AC 4313. Let's say you are taking your airframe oral and practical, specifically the practical project. You might be asked, could you find an acceptable substitute for aircraft for Sitka spruce to be used in an aircraft? This you would want to find in the AC 4313. And then you could look down and say, well, let's see, Douglas fir. Well, it exceeds spruce. And it says right here, may be used as a substitute for spruce in same sizes or slightly reduced sizes. So, yep, I could use that one. If you come down here, which one is it? Am I on this one? Okay, yeah, oh, yep, I'm looking right at it. As you notice, northern white pine says cannot be used as a substitute for spruce without increase in size. And I think this one also, it says that should not be used as a direct substitute. So that's many times what the question is what species of wood could be used as a direct substitute for Sitka spruce. Okay, so you don't pick the yellow popular or the northern white pine, you know, but you can see the other ones. If you just read it, you can make sense of it. All right, and that's all they're doing, and that's why Sitka spruce, they chose it as the reference, and then all the other types of trees, how do they compare to Sitka spruce? All right. And that's really where they're talking about in the book, Sitka spruce, and then they talk about wood substitution. All right. Now, I want a little bit more on this. Oh, why is this doing this? Hold on. I need to, okay. Kind of a pain because, okay. All right. Sorry about that. Trying to work the computer so I can do what I need to do. I don't have a blank screen, do I? Just give me a sec. There we go. Okay. All right. But like I said, there's different species of wood. Something that's not in the book, and no, you don't need to know this, but I'm going to tell you anyways. Understand that species of wood is also classified as being either a hardwood, meaning that the tree produces hardwood, or softwood. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you a question, and many of you know that Bob questions, when I ask these, they're a little, you know, I bring it up for a specific reason. How many of you have ever heard of balsa wood?
I have.
Okay. Thank you, Kayla. All right. So, Kayla,
User.
all right. Balsa wood. Would you say it is classified as a hardwood, or B, a softwood? Now, before you answer, could you describe balsa wood to somebody? Like, how would you describe it? Is it a real heavy wood?
Oh gosh. I'm
Oh,
not.
okay, so you've heard of it, but you don't know what it really
I
is.
know. Yeah, I've heard of it. I don't know anything about it except I feel like maybe they make furniture out of it.
Oh, God, no.
No.
Okay. No. All right. Anybody else has?
Heard about this in general. I think it's a soft wood that is very light.
Yeah. Balsa wood, it's crazy. Like, has anybody ever built a small wood model, like a wood aircraft model?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you get little wood strips like for an RC aircraft and stuff like that, and you glue the wood together. Balsa wood is really, really light. And the wood, like if you put your fingernail into it, you can compress it really, really easy. Balsa wood is one of the materials that we talked about in composites that, you know, we could replace the damaged core material with balsa wood as long as the grain is going from, you know, reinforcement to reinforcement, meaning vertical, let's say. Okay. But the crazy thing is although it's very lightweight and it's a very soft wood, it's actually classified as
Hardwood?
It's classified as a hardwood. So I just bring it up because I think it's kind of interesting because balsa wood is like one of the softest woods out there and it's classified as a hardwood. So what determines if the wood coming from a tree is classified as a hard or a softwood? It is the leaf of the tree, okay? For example, hardwood trees are ones that have broad leaves. Okay. A broad leaf. So if you know what an oak tree is, it has a very large leaf. If a maple leaf. So maple wood is classified as a hardwood. Yeah. Okay, that's a really bad leaf there, but
It looks like a hand from a cartoon.
yeah, right. Okay. Where softwood trees, right, are ones that have needle type of leaves, or they're what they refer to as cone bearing.
Like a pine?
Very good. Okay. So if you think of a Christmas tree, okay, Christmas trees are soft wood. Now, here's the unique thing. Okay. If you look at the different species of wood used in aircraft construction, spruce. Is spruce a hardwood or a softwood? Any thoughts?
Considering it's excellent for all causes, I want to say it's a hardwood, but I don't know.
No, I know. That's why you would think that it's a hardwood. Hey, I want a very hardwood to build aircraft. Spruce is a softwood. Because anybody know Christmas trees? One of the favorite types of Christmas trees out there is called a blue spruce. Okay. A Douglas fir is also a tree that's used for Christmas trees. It's a soft wood. Anything that says fir or pine, guess what? They're all soft, classified as soft woods. Now you might think, well, why do we use softwood trees for aircraft construction?
Is it because they're more flexible?
Very good. One is because they're generally more flexible, but understand, remember how I said balsa wood is really, really soft, but classified as a hardwood?
Yeah.
Just because the wood is classified as soft, does it really truly mean that the wood is soft? No. Some of the soft woods are harder than hardwoods. It gets a little crazy. But here's the thing. Do you know what an oak tree is? Down here in South Florida, we have what's called a live oaks.
Yeah, my mom planted one when she was pregnant with me.
Okay. And so it must be huge by now then.
It was until a few years ago, a hurricane took it out.
But when that tree grew, did it grow with a straight trunk or did it grow kind of like, okay, and then a branch came out here and then this went this way and another branch came out here and right? It grew kind of this way, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas if you think of a Christmas tree usually has a very uniform straight trunk and then with small little branches coming out, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you think about it, we want a really long piece of wood that has very straight grain. What type of tree would provide that? A hardwood tree like an oak tree or a softwood tree like a Sitka spruce, blue spruce, Douglas fir. See how the trunk is very uniform, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna say softwood.
Softwood trees create because they'll have a very and the one thing is the branches that come out of the tree is what's called creates the knots in the wood. oak, you know, if you get a piece of oak, you'll see these large, what's called hard knots. Whereas a softwood tree, they can have knots in it, but they're going to be, if they, you know, very, very small, and they don't go deep into the trunk of the tree. Okay, I'm done with that.
Question,
Yes.
what kind of wood did they use in that video where that guy built the plane?
It's a good question. I don't know, but most likely it's Douglas fir.
Okay.
Okay. It's kind of funny because Sitka spruce is the reference wood.
Yeah.
Sitka spruce is really expensive and it's actually getting very, very rare. It's named actually after Sitka, Alaska. You know, and these trees get huge and take a very long time to grow. Most aircraft wood is not Sitka spruce. Most aircraft wood is Douglas fir.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Because the strips he used looked really flexible when he was gluing them together, and I thought it was
Oh
interesting.
yeah, no, it definitely is. Definitely is. Okay. All right. So let's continue on. All right, so we talked about the wood substitution. All right, and so that's the species of wood. Okay. Now we got to kind of define that from species of wood. There's I got to click to draw. Okay. Then we have types of wood. Okay. And I wish I had a blank one, but I'm not going to delay. All right. In the different types of wood, we have three types. Okay. We have solid, laminated, and plywood. Okay. Solid wood, the name implies, it's one piece of wood. It was cut from a tree. Think about going to Home Depot, Lowe's, or whatever, and you go and you grab a piece of 2x4. Okay. That's one solid piece of wood. I don't know how else to explain that. Okay. Now, many people are familiar with plywood. Okay. Plywood are layers of wood that is glued together. Now, the unique thing about plywood is that, say, the first layer, the grain is going, you know how a piece of plywood generally is 8 feet by 4 feet wide. Sorry, that should be 8 feet by 4. Okay. And so there's the 4, there's the 8. So like the outer plies will be going the 8-foot length. The inside pieces will be going perpendicular or at 90 degrees to the other grain. And then they'll, let's say if we do 3 layers, the 2 outside layers are going the 8-foot length, and then the middle layer is going perpendicular to that. And if there's multiple layers, like some are 7, it will always be an odd number, by the way, but they will intertwine or move the grain on each layer. And this gives plywood strength in both directions. It's like going back to composites. It's kind of like the bidirectional fabric rather than unidirectional. Okay. The interesting thing is, if you think about it, how do they make, I'm going to see if I can do this real quick. Insert new slide. Okay. Okay. But how do they make plywood? If you think about it, like I said, okay, we have a piece of wood that's 8 feet by 4 feet, and you'll see that, you know, the grain is pretty much going in that direction. If you think about it, how can they get that to happen? Because if you think about it, do they have to have a tree? And these layers, the different layers of plywood, like if we looked at the end of it, you will see that, that they could be like a 1/16 of an inch thick. And there'll be, 4 layers of this, or sorry, 5 layers or so, to make up the thickness of the board. But a lot of people think that, oh, what they do is they have to have like a tree that is at least, say, 4 feet wide, and then they cut it, thin layers out of that. And actually, no, they don't. What they do is they peel the tree. So the tree is on a spindle. There's a knife blade that comes in, and they unroll and they cut it. Very similar. Think of a roll of toilet paper. Okay. If you look at the inside roll, you have all the layers, right? But when you pull off, you only have one sheet, right? And so then they cut that. And that is actually what they do to make plywood. They take a freshly cut tree before it's dried, and they peel the tree, kind of like an apple peeler, if you will. And that way you can get a huge amount of material from a small diameter tree. And this is also the reason that if you ever look at plywood, you can actually see like, okay, there's a knot, then there will be like a smaller one and a smaller one and such. And it'll be at regular intervals. These 3 knots are actually all the same branch that was coming out of the tree. Anyways, I find it interesting. You might not. But what do you need to remember? We have solid wood, we have plywood. And what's unique about plywood? That each layer is glued perpendicular or at 90 degrees to each other. We then have what's called laminated wood. Laminated wood is wood that the grain, it's going to be individual boards that are all glued with the grain going in the same direction. Okay. Now, you might run across this type of question, and that is, what type of wood can replace solid wood? Okay. We can use laminated wood in place of solid wood. Are we good with that?
Yeah, pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Okay. Because the strength, keep in mind, solid wood, the grain's going all in the same direction. Plywood, it's layers that the grain's going in opposite or perpendicular 90 degrees to each other. Laminated wood is pieces of wood that's glued together with the grain all going in the same direction, pretty much trying to make a replacement for solid wood. All right. Okay. Ooh, next. Okay, wood assessment and such. Here is a nice picture of a good quality piece of wood. You can see that the grain is, that the piece of wood has been quarter sawn. The grain is very level and straight, and the deviation, like as you can see here, the grain here, if we measure 15 inches, that grain right there has, I think it's that one, has deviated less than 1 inch. Are we good there? So that would be good. Okay. Just showing the piece of log, like I said, with the growth rings and stuff like that. Okay. For the assessment, okay, and I'm not going to go through all of these, You can read them. It's kind of funny. They go through all the different materials, or like what's brown rot, checks, compression failure, and compression wood. I will bring those two up. Compression failure is what I had said, like when the tree is felled, if it hits another log, if it hits a rock, we could have a compression failure, which is characterized by buckling the fibers that appear as streaks on the surface of the wood that are at right angles to the grain. Okay. Compression wood, on the other hand, is actually created by the growth cycle. Okay. Whereas there's appearance and excessive growth of summer wood. Compression grows little or no contrast in color between spring wood and summer wood, making it difficult to detect and identify. If you have any doubt whether a piece of wood is compression wood or not, reject it. What it is that if you look at the growth rings, a lot of times the growth rings is how much did the tree grow in that 1 year, right? So up here, the tree grew a lot, okay? Over here, now, this is a bad example, but if the growth rings are really close together, it was a slow growing tree, or that period of its life, it was growing very slowly. And that is what's known as compression wood, okay? Curly grain decay, I'm going to mention that. Figure, any type of decay in the wood is unairworthy. It's plain and simple there, okay? Dry rot is a form of decay. The unique thing about, they call it dry rot, but it happens when wood is wet. Then we have hard knots, heartwood, interlocked, and keep in mind, knots are just the branches of the tree, okay, where it came into the trunk. Mineral streaks. Mineral streaking is caused because there are minerals within the ground. And when the tree is growing, it can actually pick up these minerals. These minerals can actually discolor the wood. Now, the problem is this. Decay usually will also change the color of the wood. If the wood is decayed, we know that it's no good. Mineral streaked wood, although the color has changed, doesn't mean that the wood is bad. So they generally say, mineral streaking is acceptable as long as it does not show any signs of decay. One of the ways that you can check a piece of wood that is discolored is that to identify or differentiate between mineral streaking and decay. If you take like a little pocket knife and you poke at the wood and you kind of lift it up, if the wood splinters, okay, most likely that wood is mineral streaked. If the wood, when you kind of pry up on it, if it chunks up and not splits, then that wood is decayed and has to be rejected. All right. And yeah, that's about it there. You can read that. On page 3-5, they go into the acceptable defects. So they kind of just went, they talk about cross grain, wavy, hard knots. Okay. They say that, yeah, you can have hard knots in the piece of wood as long as, one, that it doesn't create more than a 1 in 15-inch deviation of the grain, and that it's within the center third of the board. Okay. Now, if you look under non-acceptable, they say like hard knots are unacceptable if they create more than a 1 in 15 grain deviation, if the knot is larger than 3/8, if the knot is not within the center third of the board. So just because there's knots on the board, it doesn't mean it's unacceptable. It doesn't mean it's acceptable. It has to meet certain criteria. All right. It's close enough. We're going to be taking our break now, and then we'll come back at 8:30, and we got to go through aircraft adhesives and such, and then kind of wood repairs. This chapter is very short, it's roughly 20 pages. Yes, I know we're only on page 6, but it will go quickly. All right. I'll see you back, or I will hear you. I'll start talking again at approximately 8:30.
Okay.
Okay, I'm here. I'm just turning off my mic. All right. I'm back. Time to keep going. We're on page 3-6. We're talking about aircraft adhesives and glues. The first one we need to talk about is what's known as casing and glue. Casing and glue was one of the first glues used in aircraft construction. And the interesting thing about it is it was a product of milk. And basically it was made from milk. If you ever noticed, like if you ever drank a glass of milk and you didn't wash the cup out right away, let the milk sit there, a thin layer, it actually kind of hardens up and such. And that is the protein, casein proteins in there. Now, you probably will understand that although that was the type of glue used originally in that, that glue would deteriorate. It was not, resistant to the weather very much and stuff like that. But hey, it's what they had to use, and that's what they used. Today we have other and much better types of glue. That's the plastic resin glues, resorcinol phenylformaldehyde glue, which is primarily used for the bonding of plywood sheets together. And of course, we now have the epoxy resin glues, okay? But one of the key ones to remember is that casing glue was made from milk, okay? Today, we use the plastic resin glues and epoxy. In the bonding process, okay? When we need to, and keep in mind, what a lot of people don't realize is that a wooden aircraft is glued together, and the glue is the structural component that holds the wood together, okay? Now, every now and then, to hold the pieces together so that the glue dries, they will use nails to hold the pieces together and to apply pressure to that area. Now, many times, we use what's called a gusset, okay? And I'm just going to use this picture here. But for example, on the top one here, here is the splice. And yes, it says it's incorrect, and I'll describe why it's incorrect. But they'll put another piece over top of here so that it's completely sealed. And then they'll have glue. But now to put pressure on there, instead of using clamps, they will put nails in here to hold that all together. Now, the nails are there to hold it together and put pressure on it so that the glue sets up properly. The nails are not there to hold the pieces together. The nails are not there for structural strength, okay? The thing is that these nails are so small, many times, instead of trying to remove the nails, they leave the nails there, okay? But very, very key, meaning question, are the nails used in wood construction there for structural strength? And the answer is false, no. Are the nails there to hold pieces together to allow the glue to dry properly? That would be a correct statement. Are we good there? So the nails are non-structural. So I think I killed it enough. All right. So let's say we have to glue these two pieces together. Okay. And I need to get rid of this again now. Okay, so we're going to glue two pieces together because we need a longer piece. Now, the top one here says incorrect. Why is it incorrect? Why is this one incorrect, but this one is correct? Well, if we notice the grain stops where the cut is, and the grain is kind of lining up, we never want to glue what's known as an end glue joint. An end glue joint, okay? And the reason is that you know, if you think about the end of a law, like a 2x4, if you take a 2x4 and a 2x4 and the grain's going all in the same direction, you try to glue that together, the glue will absorb into the grain of the wood and make a very weak joint, and that will fail. So this, this is why it's incorrect, because the grain is going too straight to each other. Now on this one, this piece is actually good, because if you notice, like here we have a grain, we have another grain here, but notice how much grain on this piece is not hitting where the joint is. But on this board here, we can see all the grain hitting the glue. And so this is why this one is wrong. This is wrong because both of the boards are an end glue joint. This is wrong because that one is. If we look at this one where it says correct, same thing as what we have up here, okay? We have long stretches where the grain is not touching. Even this one, we have a good distance between one length of grain and another, okay? Now, the other thing is when we're preparing the wood to be glued, the one key component, what we don't want to do is we don't want to sand the wood before we glue it. And the reason is because when we sand it, we make sawdust or sanding dust. If it's really, really difficult to try to remove all that dust. So if you try to glue two pieces of wood together after we sanded it, there's a good chance that glue joint will fail because we glued sawdust to sawdust and not the two pieces of solid wood together. So we don't want to sand it before we glue it. So what do? Well, we cut the board with a saw. We could use what's called a plane, not an airplane, but a plane, which is basically, the way I would explain it is, it's a tool that has a very sharp chisel edge on it, or like a razor blade, which will cut the wood. We just don't want to sand that wood. All right. All right.
Like a vegetable peeler?
Yes. Say again.
Is that like a vegetable peeler?
Similar, but have you ever, like one of the famous planes is called a Stanley plane, and it'll kind of look like this, and it has a handle, right? And then it'll have like a little knob in front, and underneath, that's called the sole. There's, I'm going to call it a razor blade, but it just barely sticks out the bottom and comes up there. And when you push it, it shaves that wood, and the little sliver of wood comes out the top here.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And, and that is really just a really, really sharp chisel blade, if you will. And they have smoothing, there's hundreds, if not thousands of different types of planes out there. But, there's surface planes, corner planes, joining planes, grooving planes. Well, I won't go into all the planes. Anyways, all right. So on page 3.7, when we go to apply the adhesive, all right. So a lot of times we have to mix up the glue. Now there are 4 time periods that we have to understand and know. The 4 times are: 1, the pot life. The pot life is when you mix the glue together, how long is that glue still good to use? So that, you put the glue in a pot. Hey, how long? Hey, I got 20 minutes to be able to use this glue. If 20 minutes goes by, that mix of glue is no longer any good. Okay. The second time period of gluing is known as the open assembly time. So open assembly is, we've mixed up the glue, we took it out, say with a brush, and we brushed it on the 2 pieces of wood. The time that we have before we put the wood together is known as the open assembly time, meaning once you apply it, you might have 3 minutes of open assembly time, meaning that you have to put the two pieces together within 3 minutes for the glue to properly bond. If you exceed 3 minutes, you're to clean off that glue and reapply. The next, or the third one, is what's known as the closed assembly time. That is, now that we stuck them together, we might have some time to get the pieces aligned. This might be another 2 or 3 minutes, maybe a half an hour, that the glue hasn't set up and it's still soft enough that we can move the pieces around to get it properly aligned. And that is known as the closed assembly time. And then the fourth time period is the pressure or clamping time. Okay. And that is, okay, now that we have the pieces aligned, we apply pressure to that area, and that could be by nailing strips. It could be used, clamps could be used to keep pressure on that area for a given period of time for it to cure. And that is the pressing time. Now, when you're making a repair, what's once again very similar to when we were talking about composites. I said, how, if we have to do a composite repair and we have to like heat it up and keep a certain amount of pressure on it for a given period of time, how can we, prove this? And that's where we were talking about the hot bonding equipment that will, measure what we're doing and keep track of that. And we can print that out to put it with the logbooks. Well, in wood, we're not using fancy equipment. So when you make a repair to an aircraft, you actually make 2 repairs. So let's say, we're splicing these 2 pieces of wood together for an aircraft repair. We would actually do it twice, one on the aircraft and one as a test piece. Okay. Now, after the repair is completely done, the pressing time has, done its thing, has run its course. What we do now is we take the test piece and we break it. And what we're looking for is, does the glue release or does the wood break? And in this case, the glue should be the strongest part of the repair, meaning the glue is actually stronger than the wood. So when we break it, what we want to see is that the glue is still attached to the wood, okay? And that there should be splinters in the glue, that the glue is holding onto the wood so much that the wood failed, and so there's splinters of wood in the glue. If we break it and we just see the glue separate and we see an imprint of the wood, but we don't see pieces of wood stuck in that glue, then we have to redo the repair, because if it fails the test piece, we're not sure if the actual repair on the aircraft is good, so we have to redo that repair. All right. This is where then they talk about the pressing time. Once again, we can use clamps and methods of applying pressure. They talk about hand nailing and stuff like that. They show, there's that. Here, this is a wing that has thin plywood as the skin of the aircraft. Okay. And here they're using what's called nailing strips. So they're taking strips of wood that has a whole bunch of nails in it, and they're tapping those down, which then applies the pressure on the glue joints. Now, in this case, these strips would be removed, and then the wood skin would be normally covered with fiberglass, okay, to make it aerodynamically smooth and sealed. Okay. Keep on going. When you're applying the pressure, what they're showing here is if you just apply the pressure at the edges, here and here, well, then there's a good chance we have a big gap in between. So the blocks have to distribute the pressure all the way across the glue joint. Next, they talk about inspection of wood. Okay. Wood is an organic material. If the wood gets wet, eventually it will decay. So measuring the moisture content of the wood is critical to see if the wood has absorbed excessive amount of water and thus likely has decayed. Okay. So high moisture content generally means that we have to possibly even go in there and replace some of that wood. So how can we inspect wood? Now, here's the thing. The FAA and everybody brings up this grain deviation of 15, 1 inch and 15, and that. Keep in mind, that is when you're inspecting the wood that's going to be used for aircraft construction. The grain is not going to deviate once that has been approved and it's been put on an aircraft. The grain's not going to deviate, okay? But mainly we're looking for, has the wood been damaged? Has it been overloaded? That the grain has been buckled? Is there any cracks? But a lot of it is there any decay? It's kind of like looking for corrosion on a metal aircraft. So one way is to tap the wood, like a coin tap test. If it's nice and solid, you're going to get a good solid sound. If the wood has been decayed, it's going to be soft. And when you tap it, it's going to be more of a thud than a hard knock. We can probe the wood. It's kind of funny, but taking a sharp object like a scribe and poking or probing at the wood. If the wood is solid and hard, like it should be, you're not really going to be able to penetrate that wood very easily. If it's been decayed, it's going to be much softer, weaker, and then your probe is going to enter that wood with very little force. You can pry on it to see if any glue joints are deteriorated and would separate with a little bit of force. Wood, when it starts to decay, it gives off a foul smell. So if you have a halfway decent sense of smell, smell the wood to see if you smell any foul odors. And of course, doing a visual inspection, looking for discolorization of the wood. Most wood that starts to rot and decay will turn dark. So if you see very dark spots on the wood, that would be an area that you want to check. And then the visual inspection, but also just feeling the piece of wood to see if you can kind of feel that there's any bulging of that wood that would indicate that the wood has swelled, generally because of decay and moisture. All right. But as far as like trying to inspect for the grain deviation and stuff like that, or the hard knots and stuff, the wood has already been approved. You're not going to generally find that type of, I don't want to say defect, but you're not going to generally find that the grain has deviated from when it was, you first used and such. All right. The page 11 now, we go into wood structure repairs, and they talk about wood spars. Okay. And there are questions about spars and stuff. So here's a solid rectangular wood spar. Yay. Here they've routed the sides, so you can see how the sides have been removed. The whole purpose of routing the wooden spar is to reduce weight. It's very similar to like a metal structure where we put lightning holes in. Okay, so routing of the wooden spar is to reduce weight. Now, C is kind of interesting for the fact that it's a laminated, internally routed box spar. Now, what did they do? They took a solid rectangular spar. They routed it, so then they route it to reduce weight. Then they cut it in half and they glue it back together. So the routed out area is in the center. Now you might say, what in the hell? Why in the hell would they do that? Well, once again, to reduce weight. But in many cases, we need flat surfaces so that we can glue other things to it. So you guys know I'm a very lousy drawer, okay? But let's look at a top view. So say, here's the spar and we're looking down. Well, let me make it longer. Okay, so here's the spar. Now, the spar, this is going to be inboard and this is the outboard, meaning the wingtip. Okay, now a rib goes this way. Okay, well, how do we attach the rib to the spar so it doesn't move? Well, we glue it. Okay, and so what we'll do is we'll glue little wood blocks on all four corners here. So the glue is, that wood block is glued to the spar, but also to the rib. Okay, and that's why we need, because if we glued that block like so, we would have a big gap. By having a complete flat surface, we have a greater amount of glue area. And that's why they would do that. D is just laminated spar, and you can see how the grain is going all in the same direction. F is a built up box spar. We could have an I-beam that's built up and so on. All right. Now, a lot of these, it's pretty straightforward and not a lot of information. So just to be honest, we're almost done. Okay. What they're showing here is, okay, let's say we're doing an inspection and hey, we find a crack in the piece of wood. Well, yes, we could cut that section out and put a splice in, but a lot of times what we'll do is we'll just basically like a wood splint, like if you broke your leg, we're going to put two pieces of wood and we're going to glue them onto the main part. And we like to taper that piece of wood because once again, throughout this term, we've been talking about, we don't like any abrupt changes. So you can see that the taper here is a 5:1, meaning that if this was 1 inch thickness, then that taper has to be 5 inches. Okay. Now, usually the wood ain't 1 inch thick, so it's not 5. You can see like right here, it's saying an 1/8 inch. So if the repair material is an 1/8 inch thick, then the slope is going to be 5/8 or 1 1/8 inches from here to here is going to be 1 1/8. So you mark that up, you measure to the edge of the board, excuse me, you measure back 1 1/8 inch and you taper that down. It's that simple. Okay. I kind of said that wrong, but you get the understanding of it. All right. Oh, I hate when what they're showing here is that the end piece thickness is an 1/8 inch. Okay. Again, exactly kind of the same thing, nothing big there. What they're showing here is when you go to cut the two pieces and you want to cut it so that they're matched up perfectly. And this is what makes it so labor intensive. So say you're going to do, a piece, you cut the one board like so, you cut your other board like so, say at a 45 in this case. Okay. Well, there's a good chance that when you put the two pieces together, they won't totally match up. So what we're going to do is put the two pieces together and run the saw back through the two pieces. And thus we're cutting them at the same time. So we're matching it. Okay. And that way they are ready to be glued together. Okay. Once again, here's some splices. Now, a lot of times you know, the thickness of the material here can be really small. For example, the dimension A, the thickness of this, for example, if this is a wing rib, it's a possibility that this board here is only a 1/4 inch thick. Yeah. So what are we doing? We're gluing them together, but we want to support the area. So we use thin layers of wood that we glue onto the sides, right? And this is where possibly nails would be used, once again, to keep pressure so that the glue dries. But we may not remove those nails because it would actually do more damage by removing it, okay? But keep in mind, once again, the nails are not there for structural strength, okay? And then they're showing us that, okay, we got to go 5 to 6 times the thickness of the material. So let's say it's 6. So 6 times that would be 1 2/4 or 1.5 inches out from here to here. And again, from here to here is, again, the same with an overlap of both boards by 2 times the thickness or 1/2 inch. Okay, nothing super critical there. But you can see that it does take a lot of work to properly do all these things. And you can see the different pictures and stuff. These are what's called the gussets, okay? Now, in this case, gussets are there because sometimes we can't avoid an end glue joint. So right there, we have an end glue joint. So we're going to use very thin sheets of mahogany plywood. And we cut it to shape, and then we would have glue here. We would have glue onto these, and then small nails are generally placed along there to keep pressure on it for the glue to dry. Are we good there? But those are the gussets. Again, some other trailing edge. All right. Like I said, we're almost done with the lecture. All right. We're talking about plywood skin repairs. So once again, the plywood can be really, really thin plywood. And let's say we have a hole, right? There are many different ways we could repair this, but one method is called a splayed repair. And the other one's called a scarfed. Okay. This right here is a splayed repair. So what did they do? If you look here, okay, they basically take the piece of wood, and let's say this was the original opening. We drill that open. Well, then we want to go 5 times the thickness. So let's say the material is 1/4 inch thick, okay? We go 5 times 1/4 inch or 1 1/4 inches out on both sides. And then what we're going to do is, using a plane or a file, we're going to taper that down. So it's a 5 times the thickness, or 5-to-1 ratio. Then we take our repair material, we measure from here to here, cut that out, and on the backside, the diameter down here. And then we taper that piece, so the piece will properly match inside. And that's the repair piece right here. We then glue that, and then we apply a pressure block and a weight or clamp to hold it into place. The difference between a splayed repair and a scarfed is a splayed repair is 5 to 1 or 5 times the thickness, where a scarfed is 12 times the thickness or 12 to 1 ratio. Okay. A scarfed patch then, instead of being like this, has a much greater taper. That much greater taper makes a much stronger repair because we have a larger glued area, and it's generally will be a much smoother repair. Are we good there? Talk to me, folks.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
Okay,
sorry, I forgot my mic was muted.
no problem. Okay, so guess what? That was the lecture on wood structures. All right, so we still have a little bit more time. So what we're going to do now is go over the FAA questions in wood. Are we ready?
I hope so.
Okay. First question says laminated wood spars may be substituted for solid rectangular wood spars. And the answer is yes,
Yes.
if the same quality of wood is used in both. So solid spars can be repaired or replaced by laminated wood spars as long as the same quality of wood is used. Next, the strength of a well-designed and properly prepared wood splice joint is provided by what? And that is the glue. Okay? The glue is what, it's the strongest part of the repair. Next, where is information found concerning acceptable species or substitutions for wood materials used in aircraft repair? I brought that one up. You would find it in the AC 4313. Next, in case of elongated bolt holes, and by the way, I didn't speak about it when we were lecturing, but elongated bolt holes, the only type of repair you can do is to remove those holes and replace it. Well, how would you do that? You got to cut out that section and replace it, or replace the whole spar. Okay, so in cases of elongated bolt holes in a wood spar or cracks in the vicinity of bolt holes, okay, the answer is a new section of spar should be spliced in or the spar replaced entirely. Okay, you can't just like, hey, I'm going to use some wood putty and fill in the hole and drill a new hole. No, no. You have to remove the elongated hole by cutting it out and putting in a new spliced in piece. And in many cases, because you're limited to basically 3 splices in a spar, okay? So majority of the time, it is best to say, replace the whole spar, or, you know, you can make one kind of repair. But if you do that, it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to replace from the bolt hole, you know, past the bolt hole to the inboard, or from the bolt hole to the outboard tip of the spar, rather than trying to cut out just the center section and replace that. Next, a faint line running across the grain of a wood spar generally indicates compression failure. Remember, I mentioned compression failure means that the grain has broken, right? And it will go perpendicular to the grain. which statement about wood decay is correct? And the answer is decay is not acceptable in any form or amount. Next, the I-beam wooden spar is routed to do what? And the answer is to reduce weight. Pin knot clusters. Pin knot clusters basically is small little branches coming out. And so there will be a whole bunch of little knots in a very small area. Now, they're acceptable if they produce a small effect on grain direction. By the way, we're doing this, and then we do have a wood project that I'll turn on my camera and I'll go through that. Okay, here's a question that really is not one that was in the wood section. And it says, the cantilever wing uses. Now, we did talk about cantilever wings at one time. It was a lot, it was like one of the first days of lecture. But a cantilever wing is a wing that has no external bracing. All right, so the answer is no external bracing. Okay. If you think about most commercial airliners, this R-72, we have wings coming out, but we have no external bracing. That was known as a cantilever wing. If you look at a lot of high wing aircraft like Cessna 152s, 172s, the wings stretch out, but there is a diagonal piece that goes from the fuselage to kind of the middle of the wing. That's an external brace. So those wings are not a cantilever wing. All right, next. When patching a plywood skin, abrupt changes in cross-sectional areas, which will develop dangerous stress concentrations, should be avoided by, well, what they're saying is, when you make a repair, what shape should the repair be? And as we know from sheet metal, we like to use round or elliptical patches. So circular or elliptical patches is the right answer. Next. Compression failures in wood aircraft structures are characterized by buckling of fibers that appear as streaks on the surface. And the answer is at right angles to the grain. I usually use the word perpendicular, but right angle, perpendicular is the same. A balsa wood question. When balsa wood is used to replace a damaged honeycomb core, the plug should be cut so that the grain, this is the answer, the grain is perpendicular to the skin, meaning that like the composite project that we did with the honeycomb, the grain should be going the same as the honeycomb, meaning, the grain should be going top to bottom. And the last question that I have is, what is the purpose of a gusset? And the answer is to join and reinforce intersecting structural members. Whew. I tell you guys, this one's a tough class. All right. Oh, I did the wrong one. Ready? Okay. Hey, everybody. Okay. There is a project in wood, and it's to identify defects in wood samples. Okay. So we have 5 boards here. And the first one is A, okay? Now, right away, we might notice that right here, we have a knot, a hard knot. Now, this generally, this ain't what I'm going to say is the problem. Okay, is that we have a hard knot. Say it's less than 3/8 of an inch in diameter. It's in the center third of the board. So that knot, if it met that criteria, would not reject this board, okay? But I know it's a little hard to see, and so I kind of drew a marker on it. But over here, sorry, over here is one of the grain lines that I highlighted, and you can see how far the grain changes direction. And so this is a representation that the grain is deviating more than 1 inch in 15. So that is the problem with this board. Now we have board B, okay? Now one, yes, I know this is not a quarter sawn board. You can see, you know, a little bit of grain lines here, but you see these funky grain lines coming this way and then kind of going up or here over here. And this is really hard to do. It's kind of like looking in the mirror, but that's not the purpose of this one. I got to turn it around. Okay. And what we see here is a voided area. This is what's called pitch pockets. Okay. Many of you know that a tree, it has what's called tree sap. Okay. And that sap many times is called pitch. Okay. And this is a voided area or a pocket in the wood that was filled up with the resin of the tree. And thus it's known as a pitch pocket. And so that weakens the board, and thus this piece would not be acceptable. That was B. Okay, so here we have C, okay? And I don't know if you can really see it, but all these little, I'm trying to get it to the right angle, all these little like dark spots that you see, those are the pin knots, okay? And that what we would refer to as pin knot clusters, okay? As long as they don't create a large grain deviation, they're okay because they're smaller than 3/8. They're not creating the grain deviation. This one board though, I'm not going to say it's the pitch pockets, but we have a hard knot up top here that's creating a large grain deviation. We also have knots on the back side. And guess what? They're on the outside of that center third of the board. And thus knots in this area is rejected all the time. Okay. And that is C. Here we have example of a discolorization of the wood, okay? Anytime you see a discolorization of the wood, you should suspect that the wood has decayed. Now, remember though, mineral streaking can also cause the wood to change color. One of the things that you can do is pick at that area to see if it splinters or if it chunks up. If it splinters, it's mineral streaking and really could be used. But if it chunks up, that's decay and that section has to be removed. Are we good there? And then we come to E. I love E, okay? If you look at E, and I'll try to get up close, can you see the grain, how nice and straight it is? If I show you the edge of the board there, you can see like the rings kind of start here, but they're very parallel to each other. It's a beautiful piece of wood right there, okay? For all practical purposes, this would be aircraft quality. Although this is probably white wood and not aircraft quality. But there's a section, and I kind of highlighted it, that if we look at this, the grain kind of goes and then it bumps up and then comes back down. The thing is that if we measure that, that grain deviation isn't past that 15:1. It's not deviating an inch or more within 15. But the thing is when we see this, we have to do further investigation, because why is the grain deviating so quickly in such a small area? Well, just by looking at this part, if you went, by the book, you would say that's aircraft quality. But we need to further investigate why the grain shouldn't really change that quickly or abruptly. Well, in this case, if we turn it around, you can see on the backside this piece there, right? Well, ready for this? This piece of wood came from a Caribbean island from a banana plantation. And during a hurricane, a banana actually got pushed in to the tree. And then as the tree grew, the banana basically petrified in that piece of wood. Ain't that amazing?
That almost sounds hard to believe.
Because it is, it's a lie. What that is, okay, if we look here, see the knot? That's where the branch of the tree was growing out. Most of the time, you only see the knot like so. It just so happened that this board was cut parallel to the branch. So this is the center of the tree, and this is where the branch was growing out of the tree. I'm sorry to say, that's not a banana petrified in a piece of wood, but it looks like a banana. And some people,
That's interesting though, man.
but some people call it a banana knot. The actual terminology is, this is what's called a spike knot. But can you see, like, if that wood was actually thicker, you wouldn't even see that. You would see how it just kind of changes direction in a small area. But now that you kind of notice it, it's like, okay, what's going on? But if that was thicker, you wouldn't see this part. You would see like that. Well, that's why we would have to look on the edge and we would see, oh shit. Oh, sorry, I swear. I didn't mean to. You would see that knot there, and that knot would reject this piece of wood. Now, if you cut that piece of wood here, you could cut that part off and the rest of the board could be usable. All right. Okay, I am looking for, and I don't see it. Oh, just give me a second. Give me a second. Oh, well, that's why it was doing it. Okay. Okay, everybody's still there, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Just bear with me. I know it's dark and I'm gonna, okay. Okay, so we're done with lecture. We did the project, right? We went over the FAA questions. All right, so we're going to end this, at this time, or at 9:30, if you will. That gives us 2 hours of lecture. Like I said, I'll stop the recording, and shortly thereafter, I'll be able to publish it if you want to go back. But keep in mind, you have to complete section A. That's what I wanted to do. I'm sorry. There it goes. I got to do that. Now I got to do this. And now, okay, there we go. Can you see where I'm at? I'll go back to the home page. All right, so what do you have to do? you need to do the assessments. We go to quizzes and tests, right? We have section A, we have the wood review, right? That's 2 hours, that's 2 hours, that's 2 hours, so that's 6. We did the 2 here, that's 8. You got the videos and that, which should equate to a total of 11 hours. Are we good there? Keep in mind, by the end of tomorrow, you can see I have the final, required to be done by 11:30 tomorrow night. Okay. You have plenty of times to go through section A, wood review, read the material, all that fun stuff. You know that you have the videos to watch, the final, and I'm, okay. Excuse me there, that's what I want. It's X number of FAA questions. Okay, basically there's 14 FAA questions, and then there's the Bob questions. Basically the Bob questions are true and false, or, is it this one or that one? All right. But, so they're multiple choice, but basically true, false type of questions. Are we good there?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Now, so everybody understands, we're going to be ending this lecture and the Zoom meeting. You're to do the online material tomorrow. You're online, you're finishing up all your online material, get the section A, the wood review, do the wood final tomorrow, watch the videos, and we're all good, right? On Friday, we start welding, okay? So on Friday, we're having another Zoom lecture on welding, okay? And then on Friday, I will discuss how we're going to come in and do the welding projects, all right? And I'll be sending out an email to everybody in welding about, okay, this is what we're doing, on Friday, but I've actually already sent that out, but I'll resend that email to everybody. Are we good?
Yes.
Yes. Diego, I know this was like one of the best classes you probably ever had on wood, right?
Yes, it was one of the best.
One of the best,
Most interesting.
one of the best lectures you've ever had on wood structures. I know. Yeah. Especially because it's probably the only one you ever had. So how could it be the worst? Well, it probably was the best and the worst. So, this online stuff sucks big time, but it is what it is. All right. If there's no questions, let me stop the recording.